My name is Chad Etzel. I'm the host of the 8th Day Coaching Podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm also a trained and certified leadership coach, and my goal is to help you overcome stress and master your time, your money, and your God-inspired future. Now, typically this podcast is about leadership coaching, but I've been encouraged by a number of my friends, a number of the people that I've talked to apply these leadership coaching principles into our personal lives. And specifically with this new series, I'm calling it Catholic, Single, and Flourishing. The goal of the series is to help you as Catholic singles live your God-inspired calling, your vocation today, but also pave a path for the future. So feel free to check out this episode, check out the description in the show notes below, look for the links for the new podcasts and ways that you can connect with me, and also check out a free resource. It's an ebook that I wrote about helping Catholic singles break the cycle of pressure and inaction. With that, here we go with the episode. Hello and welcome into the 8th Day Coaching Podcast. My name is Chad Etzel. I'm the host of the 8th Day Coaching Podcast, and this is a special edition. It's the Seek edition. So every year, Focus has an annual conference, and it's just such a privilege to be on the Seek podcast, which is helping people get in the mindset, getting people ready for the Focus conference. Personally, my name is Chad. I served on campus for Focus at George Mason University, then as a team director at Washington State University, and I currently serve full-time for headquarters as a leadership coach, where I help managers and advancing leaders become the leaders that God calls them to be. I help them grow in their leadership and their management skills. And so it's a real privilege to be able to merge my two worlds together. I am a trained and certified coach. I graduated from my program back in July of 2021. And I started my business with the idea of helping young people, such as yourselves, overcome stress and master your time and money. And everyone, I think, is a leader in their own life. Even if you're a mother or a father, you have to have leadership skills in those relationships. If you're a student, if you're a professional, you have to have those leadership skills, even if you're not managing people. And if you're just a friend, you have to have leadership skills to get people together and walk with. So that's who I really want to speak to you in terms of helping you take leadership skills and apply them into your own personal lives. I've had 2 seasons of the 8th Day Coaching Podcast. I'm starting my 3rd one. And with this one, I did some research and found there was an opportunity to speak to a specific group. And this group is those Catholics who feel that they are in a state of perpetual singleness, the perpetually single, as I sometimes call them. And this group has a wide variety of backgrounds. Everybody has a unique and unrepeatable story. But very specifically, I think a lot of them experience loneliness, experience dating frustrations, experience pressure to maybe get their lives on in going. And that pressure comes from all these different places, from people that we observe to friends and so on and so forth. What I found very common with this group is that there can be a sense of wandering or a sense of a lack of purpose. And as I've had these conversations and done my research, I found that many Catholic singles, they might want to get married, but deep down, they want to figure out what God's call in their life is today. And the theme, it's so fitting, because the theme of the conference for Seek is "You Are Called." So it fits very well with being able to speak to this audience. I am starting this new series. I'm calling it Catholic, Single, and Flourishing. And the goal is to help Catholic singles live their vocation today, live their God-inspired calling today, and pave a path for the future. So it's not just simply, a podcast series that's about a support group. I think that there's a time and a place for that, and we can certainly share our experiences on social media and these different podcast platforms and so on, and I'm happy to do that. But my goal here is to not just share our experience, but also take ownership over our lives and make actionable steps forward in our lives. So as it relates to this episode in particular, I'm going to go through an experience that I had going on a date at a Focus conference. And I'm going to share with you the 4 lessons that I learned from that particular experience. And then I'm also going to share practical steps that can help you take steps forward in your single life. Or maybe you can provide these to friends if you're not in this category that maybe experiences perpetual singleness, but you can share these with others. So starting with that experience of going on a date at Seek, I have to start by just kind of giving you the background. At the time, I was a Culture Project missionary, and maybe you've heard of the Culture Project, maybe you haven't, but really think of it similar to Focus. It's recent college graduates that give a year of their lives or more to serving on mission. And one of the things that the particular work, one thing is chastity talks, another thing is giving human dignity talks. So sexual integrity, human dignity. Really, it's all about promoting a life of virtue and inviting young people into that. Aside from the work, one of the most profound things about that experience working with the Culture Project was the community. Some of the greatest friendships that I still have today, I started with the Culture Project. It's just a very beautiful program, missionary program, and such a blessing to be a part of it. And it was those friendships that I really built, being able to observe others, being able to learn from others, being able to learn what women really want in dating experiences were just such profound things that I found very valuable in my experience when I was a missionary for the Culture Project. Well, it just so happened several years ago, I was attending a Focus conference with the Culture Project because we were often there tabling at these events. And I was about 18 months removed from my dating fast. So just like Focus has a dating fast, first-year missionaries for the Culture Project are on a dating fast. So I was about 18 months, a year and a half after my dating fast, and I hadn't experienced a lot of success in the dating world. To a certain extent, it was kind of like I would go on a date or two here and there, and things just wouldn't really work out. So I at this time too, just having these conversations with my peers in the Culture Project, I would experience a lot of pressure. And within this, there's pressure from just some of my friends. I think some of the messaging was, hey, it's your job as a man to ask women out. And I think in a certain sense, it can be overwhelming, but I think in a certain sense, it can be healthy because it actually pushes us forward. But you have that story going on in your mind, that it's your duty as a man to ask women out. And then you get put into a place where there's thousands of members of the other sex, men and women. And it's like, okay, Chad, have your choosing, pick one, and that's where it can really get overwhelming for men. And then certainly I think for women as well, because they might be on alert because all of a sudden the men are being told, hey, man, you need to initiate and so on. So a lot of that's going on and just kind of in my mind. And I remember just thinking, okay, I just got to take it easy. Just got to be patient with this and just see what happens. And I arrive at the venue and I get there early because I was on a red-eye flight from Portland from the day earlier and dropped off my stuff in the hotel room. I just decided to see where things were, found the conference chapel, the adoration chapel, and Jesus was not present there because we hadn't had mass. But just spent a little bit of time in prayer in there. And then I started walking out of the chapel and I encountered 3 women there as they were exiting the chapel. We started getting into a conversation. I asked them where they were from. They shared the school that they were from. And I shared that I was from the Culture Project. And one of the women in that group said, hey, actually, my campus minister told me I should check this out. Tell me a little bit about the Culture Project. So we had about a 5-minute conversation, her and a couple of her friends who were with her. And then I said, yeah, just come check out the Culture Project. We got a lot of free handouts. We like to do that at the Culture Project. We have a lot of really awesome images. And so I just invited her to come check out the Culture Project at some point. My job there, being a Culture Project missionary, was to do tabling. And so the conference was just going on as normal. I remember the next day, I just ran into her and she remembered my name. She said, hey, Chad. And she didn't pause for very long. She was also flanked by a couple of her other female friends, just kept walking along. And so I just kept going about my business. But the thought crossed my mind, hey, maybe I should ask her out. But the other thought came and it was like, well, I guess she's constantly with her friends. So it's going to be very difficult unless we have like a real conversation. And the next day, shortly before the evening keynote, I remember I was tabling and she walked up to the Culture Project table with a couple of her friends. Once again, her friends surrounding him. We started a conversation, and about a minute into the conversation, her friends ended up walking away from her, went to the table, went to check out what the Culture Project was all about. So here we are having this conversation, and I'm getting this idea, okay, maybe I should just ask her out. And I know that there's this ticking timer going on in my head. 5-10 minutes I probably have before it's too late. And so I went for it. I asked her out, asked her to grab drinks. I wanted to get to know her a little bit better. And she said yes. Her eyes lit up. And so it was like, hey, maybe there's something here. So she ends up going to the keynote. I end up going to the keynote, and we have plans to grab drinks after the keynote. So that's what we do. Fantastic conversation, just a really good conversation. I think we were really, really connecting very well. And so I had previously gone around and just checked and seen what was around and if there were places to go outside the conference center. And so for that evening, I invited her the next evening to, go outside the conference center and do something. And she respectfully declined. But what she did say was, hey, my school, my campus is hanging out because we're celebrating somebody's birthday, and you should just come to that and we can spend some time there. So that's what I did. And also what happened was some of the Culture Project missionaries were there as well. So I got to get to know some of her people, her campus, and she got to know some of the Culture Project people. And from there, I also invited her to just go one-on-one and continue to have our conversation. And that's what we did. We left outside of the bar. We're just sitting in the conference center together, continuing to get to know one another. I really felt like there was a lot of momentum, and I just invited her to continue to talk with me as we went to our respective places. I was living in Philadelphia at the time. She was down in the southern states, and I decided to, just give her a call about a week later. And that's really what happened. I mean, the first call, it just felt super relatable. We both had older sisters, 2 years older than us. We both really encountered Jesus Christ, and our faith, each of us with our own respective stories, were big parts in our own healing experiences with some of the wounds related to our families of origin. And so I really felt like we were connecting and things were progressing. I felt so good about this that, we were talking once a week. I'm considering to go for a visit. I started asking some of my friends, hey, how did you make your long distance relationship successful? And I remember one in particular, one couple said, hey, if the relationship is worth it, it comes down to choice. Do you want it, and does she want it? So I just remember that lesson very profoundly in my mind. And just think about this here. This is a dream situation, all right? You meet somebody randomly at a conference. The opportunity presents itself to ask somebody out, and you get several evenings of one-on-one time with each other. Things just unfolded perfectly, and it's just like a Disney movie. And all of that lasted 4 weeks. Now, things started to come down to earth because we started talking about the upcoming year. And I got a full scholarship to study at the Augustine Institute in Denver. So I was going to be moving from Philly. And she had an opportunity to teach abroad. And it just became more and more clear. I wanted it, but she didn't. She didn't want it as much. And so it just didn't work out. So maybe at this point in this podcast episode, you're thinking to yourself, well, Chad, thanks for this non-success story. How's this supposed to help me out? I mean, I'm really glad I tuned into this podcast now. But the truth is, what's going to happen is you're going to hear inspiring stories of relationships that succeeded, people who ended up getting married. If you go to Seek or you go to any conference in the future, you're going to hear those success stories. But very rarely do we hear these non-success stories. But oftentimes in these non-success stories, and I call them that because they're not failures, because in these non-success stories, we always learn something. And that's where God is oftentimes. God wants to speak to us in each of these stories. And that's one of the things here is like God speaks to us if we're willing to listen. God had something to tell me even in this situation that didn't turn into even a dating relationship. It certainly didn't turn into a marriage. But one of the things that I was doing at that time, I was journaling. And getting ready for this podcast episode, I referenced my journal all those years ago as I was preparing this, just to see what I was thinking, what I was feeling in those moments, what I was experiencing, to be able to share these lessons with you. And so that's why I'm going to share these 4 lessons that I learned from this Seek conference in this particular situation where I asked this woman out. And number 1, I just remember this very, very vividly. Curtis Martin, founder of Focus, was giving one of the keynotes. And he delivered this message, and he was talking about the sexual revolution. He said, the sexual revolution is about a lack of hope. Basically telling you, you can never find that special person. You can never be that special person. And what it does is it encourages us to settle for hookups, settle for relationships that we know that person is not the person for us that we're called to marry. It teaches us to settle and settle for shallow relationships. So that's one thing that I just remember from that, is that the culture tells you to settle. That's one of these lessons. And one of the things that he used was a quote from St. Catherine of Siena, one that he quotes pretty much every one of his talks that he gives. And she says, if you are who you ought to be, you will set the world on fire. Okay, the Sikh theme is you are called. That's the theme for this conference, in this event, is you are called. So God calls us to be a certain person. Even right now, even as single people, we're called. And we're called to set the world on fire. If you are who you are meant to be, you will set the world on fire. Now, me personally, in this situation, I wasn't meant to be her husband. But at the same time, I was called to set the world on fire in a totally different way. That God had his specific purpose in mind beyond what could have been written in a storybook relationship or a Nicholas Sparks novel. I don't know if he's still cool anymore, but Nicholas Sparks. Anyway, that was number one, is that I think the sexual revolution is about a lack of hope. It teaches us to settle. So God wants to give us that hope. Number two is the epiphany, following the star to Jesus Christ. I think we're all familiar with the story of the Magi who follow the star to Jesus, but we often miss a very specific detail. And I'm going to read this to you from Scripture. This comes from Matthew 2, 1-2, and it's the Magi, and it's about the Magi. Now, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east. All right, there's a star in the east. They're following it. And a lot of times we just think that the star is there. It's stagnant. It's over where Jesus is. But really what happens is Herod, he consults the scribes and the chief priests about what this is and where this is. So that suggests that the star, they don't actually see the stars. All the whole journey of the days, the months, the year of journey, or however long it was for these Magi, the star at a certain point went away. They didn't see the star anymore, and that's why they had to make this sort of pit stop here with Herod. Otherwise, they would have just continued right to Jesus. So they had to check with him, and he ascertains, okay, the king is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. So he tells the Magi to go to Bethlehem. And so moving down to verse 9, what it says is, when they had heard the king, they went their way, and lo, the star which they had seen in the east went before them. So, boom, there's the star. They see the star once again, until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So again, the star is back. The star disappears. The star's back. It's just an incredible thing to think about. They're journeying. They lose a star. They have to search in darkness, but then they see it again. Now, why is this relevant? Why is this relevant to Seek? Well, Seek happens around the same time that the Epiphany is, and this was a homily. It was pointed out in a homily that I went to, even though it wasn't at Seek. It was a homily that I wouldn't have attended if I hadn't gone to the conference and then traveled to Denver after that. And one of the things that the priest pointed out to us was that sometimes we have to search in the darkness. All right. The Seek theme, once again, is you are called. The star represents our call from God, and sometimes our call is abundantly clear, but sometimes we have to search in the darkness. And I think that's a way for the Catholic single life in many ways. We might be dating somebody. Maybe we're broken up with. We had seen the star, but then it disappeared. Or we're pursuing religious life. We enter seminary, whatever it is, and we're in that. Maybe we get asked to leave. The star is there. The star disappears. We have to search in darkness. But what happens then is the Magi see the star. Sometimes that same star reappears, or sometimes it's a different star entirely. But the point here is that God continues to call us to him, and the star marks where Christ is. So that's what our call is just like the Magi, we're called to follow the star. And a lot of this takes a lot of persistence, patience, humility, and faith. And here I am several years later looking back on this homily, seeing this in the context of this dating situation that didn't really work out. and seeing how my searches in the darkness, the stars that God gives me, they're pieces along the way that really shape who I am as I'm called to set the world on fire once again. Lesson number 3, thinking more practically. All right, there's some spiritual lessons there. There's some human lessons there that I've shared already. But the third one is that the stars didn't just align, but we created our own opportunities here. So asking this girl out, number 1, I had the courage to ask, but she also made herself available to be asked. I think over and over we're told men need to be the initiator, and I think that there's definitely truth to that. I think a lot of times maybe women feel that they don't have a sense of action, like they can do anything to change their dating situation. But what I really appreciated in seeing this young woman and what she did, she had a more proactive approach. Yes, she was surrounded by her friends. I brought that up. Every time she was walking around, she was with her friends. But we still ended up in a one-on-one situation, a one-on-one conversation. She was also sending the signals. She was smiling. She was engaged in the conversation. I know, and I'm sure many men know, there's these signals sometimes where women are just looking for the escape and trying to get away from the conversation. But she was giving those signs of friendliness, kindness, that was inviting enough for me to ask her out. For men, I think we need to look for the opportunities, but maybe even create the opportunities, but at the same time, don't force them. Now, somebody might ask with this is like, would you recommend going on a date at Seek? And I would say with discretion. I would say don't force anything because, again, everybody's experiencing this pressure of, men, you need to step up and ask women out. And am I going to ask like a random person out, random woman out? I mean, it's possible. Sometimes there's stories that where that works out. But in my experience, it just hasn't happened that way. I think that especially women can be very skeptical of a random guy approaching her for the first time. What does this guy want? So at the same time, I think we need to be receptive to the ways that God is calling us to take steps forward here. And I'll say this too, that asking somebody out, it's out of my norm of Seek experiences. For the most part, I've been to, I don't know, like 8 or 9 Seek conferences, and there's only been 1 or 2 times that I've asked somebody out. So it is outside the norm of my experiences. But I just want to give you encouragement that if there are those opportunities where you have a good rapport with somebody, maybe you've even known them beforehand, this might be the time to ask her out. Now, I want to look at the fourth thing. The fourth thing is just really something that I've observed over time. This is the fourth lesson, that there's a temptation for us to compare ourselves to others. In the context of Seek, when we're looking at a Seek speaker, I mentioned the success stories or the non-success stories that I had before, but we hear these success stories, and a lot of times we can be amazed and impressed. But one of the things that it can do is it can create a narrative in our mind that our dating lives need to look like that we need to do that exact same thing that this other person did. Or we see our friends and we see the relationships that work out for our friends, and at the same time, we create the story that our lives need to look like those as well. But I want to caution you away from that narrative that your life has to look like somebody else's. And that's why I'm sharing this sort of non-success story, because you can learn from, hey, there's always lessons to be learned, even when things don't go our way. So with that, I want to point out that everybody's situation, everybody's life, everybody's relationship is unique and unrepeatable. So what I do want to encourage you is pay less attention to the process of the story, what the person actually does in their story, and pay more attention to virtue, the virtues that it takes for them to take steps forward, to show courage, especially if you're men, or women for active receptivity, as illustrated in this story that I shared with this example today. And virtue is something that is repeatable. And I know it can be difficult if you've heard this over and over about being more and more virtuous, but I think it really is that spiritual muscle that we exercise and grow in, but we also learn from observing others. So pay attention to the virtue, whether it's this conference, it's Seek coming up here, or it's future conferences or talks that you hear in the future. The truth is that Catholic dating and Catholic single life, it is difficult, but so is marriage. So is priesthood, so is religious life. These are difficult vocations every time. Every time God is going to be giving us some sort of cross to carry. And he's going to be speaking to us no matter what. So with that, I just want to give you some practical resources as we wrap up the podcast here. Number one, I wrote this free ebook just for you, and it's about breaking the cycle of pressure and inaction. So you can find that at CatholicSinglesSolutions.com. There's a webpage just for that. And so you can get your free ebook there. Number two, I want to encourage you to subscribe to my podcast, the 8th Day Coaching Podcast. You can find it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, basically wherever you get podcasts. And I want to encourage you to listen to the past episodes, which may be more directed towards leadership, personal finance, and so on and so forth. But then there's this brand new series that's just coming out, Catholic Single and Flourishing. Just a few episodes have been released, and I want to encourage you to listen to that, especially if this is your particular pain point in your life right now. In past episodes, I've had Dr. Greg Bottaro come on from Catholic Psych. He really speaks to the loneliness that oftentimes we as perpetually singles feel around the holidays. So he really speaks into that. He's a clinical psychologist. We're going to have future episodes where Arlene Spenceley comes on, Dr. Edward Sri comes on, and Christina Whalen. She's the foundress and president of the Culture Project. She's going to be coming on, sharing her inspiring story. She has such an incredible story of being on mission for the Lord and also finding her husband in the process in the later years than what we typically hear from a lot of these success stories where marriage happens at a younger age. My goal with this podcast is really just to help with actionability. It's not just simply dealing with feelings, but actually helping to mobilize and push you into action, which is one of the reasons I wrote that ebook on breaking the cycle of pressure in inaction, because I think a lot of the pressure really holds us back from taking steps forward. And last thing I want to say, I am a coach at heart and a coach in practice. I'm a leadership coach. I've done personal finance coaching. I've done small business coaching. I'm here to help you as a coach in any of those needs. I'm breaking into Catholic singles coaching, whether it's dating in particulars towards dating and practicals in dating, or whether you want to grow in other things long-term strategic in your career, your personal finance, and so on. I'm here to help you with those, whether it be the podcast or if you want to hire me for one-on-one or group coaching. My goal here with this particular Catholic Singles and Flourishing series is to help you live your God-inspired vocation, your calling, help you live that today, but also pave a path for the future. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up here. I'm going to be present at Seek. You can feel free to check the show notes for all these resources here, and check the show notes for my email and information, my contact information, and you can feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a conversation at some point. I'm going to be bouncing around a lot at Seek, so I may or may not be super available, but I may be hanging out with the Culture Project from time to time, so you may be able to find me there. But anyway, one, I encourage you to check out the Culture Project table. Two, if you have any questions for me, reach out to me, whether it be on social media or in the contact information that I'm providing in the show notes here. And final note here, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not able to make it to Seek, there are online opportunities, whether you're bringing it to your parish or your small group, or you're just wanting to listen and watch the talks for your own personal growth and faith and edification. There are virtual options. We'll also put those in the description and the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the 8th Day Coaching Podcast, the special Seek edition. Remember, you are called. Live inspired. Live God-inspired. Thank you for watching this episode of the 8th Day Coaching Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe on this YouTube channel, and check the description down below for any free offerings that I have, like my ebook on breaking the cycle of pressure in inaction for Catholic singles. Also, feel free to check out our other offerings at 8thdaycoaching.com.